This book exposes exactly how to rewrite reality and get whatever you want, revealing a forbidden law long kept from ordinary people. As you listen, you'll uncover the truth. Reality was never fixed, only waiting to be rewritten by those who knew how. The forbidden law is about to be exposed. Introduction. There is a forbidden law, deliberately and carefully kept from ordinary people across countless generations, by which the reality you have always assumed to be fixed and final can, in genuine truth, be revised, edited, and rewritten entirely from within. You have been taught, since your earliest years, to think of your life as a book already written, its chapters set, its ending predetermined, its pages closed to any hand, but time's own indifferent progress. You have been taught to accept your circumstances the way one accepts a manuscript already printed and bound, believing, without ever truly testing the belief, that whatever draft you happen to inherit at birth is the only draft you will ever be permitted to read. This is not truth. It is a carefully maintained silence, and that silence has served, quite conveniently, those who benefited from your never once questioning it. Those who profited from the limitation and struggle of others have always had every reason to make this law seem forbidden, dangerous, or simply not worth believing in the first place. A population convinced that its story is finished, its draft already sealed beyond revision, is a population that labors without complaint, accepts without resistance, and never once reaches for the pen it was always, quietly, still holding. And so, across centuries, through means both deliberate and merely careless, the true nature of reality, as a living and editable manuscript open still to revision by the very hand that first drafted it, was allowed to fade from common knowledge, buried in old texts, dismissed as superstition, mocked wherever it could not simply be ignored into obscurity. What follows in these pages is the uncovering of a long-hidden discipline, one that treats your own reality not as an unchangeable and finished fact, but as a living manuscript still entirely open to revision, still awaiting the next line you choose to write into it. This is not a matter of wishing upon your circumstances from some safe and passive distance, hoping vaguely that something might shift on its own. It is a matter of active and deliberate authorship, the recognition that you have been writing your own story all along, in every habitual thought and every unexamined feeling, whether or not you ever thought to notice the pen in your own hand. The smallest inner revisions, made with genuine sincerity and true feeling, gradually and quite reliably reshape the larger and outward story of your life. A single sentence, rewritten within, ripples outward across the pages that follow it, altering not merely the scene immediately before you, but the whole unfolding narrative beyond it. There is a clear and important distinction to be drawn here between passively accepting whatever draft of reality you happen to inherit, unquestioned and unexamined, and actively, deliberately rewriting it, line by careful line, into something that finally and truly reflects what you intend your life to become. Set aside now, if you are able, any lingering belief that your own reality lies somehow beyond your editing, that you are merely a reader of a story someone else has already finished, rather than its author still holding the pen. Enter this forbidden law with open and receptive attention, releasing whatever old and inherited assumptions have kept you, until this very evening, from reaching for what was always rightfully yours. The deeper instruction of Part 1 awaits you now, ready to show you exactly how the rewriting begins. Act 1. The Law They Tried to Hide. Chapter 1. The Law No One Was Supposed to Find. Cassius Merriweather worked as a young archivist in a great university library, spending his quiet days cataloguing manuscripts that had sat undisturbed on their shelves for generations, their spines cracked and their pages yellowed with age and long neglect, One particular autumn afternoon, sorting through a box of documents recently donated from a dissolved private estate, he came across a slim and deliberately misfiled manuscript. Tucked improperly among unrelated agricultural records as though someone, long ago, had wished it never to be found by any casual searcher passing through the archive. Its pages described, in careful and confident handwriting, a forgotten law by which inner belief reshapes outer circumstance, and Cassius sat with it for a long while that afternoon, turning its worn and fragile pages, wondering why any book of such evident sincerity and craft would ever have been so carefully hidden away, filed where no honest searcher would ever think to look for it. This forbidden law was never lost by simple accident, or by the ordinary passage of time, however convenient that explanation might seem to the casual observer glancing over the matter. It was quietly buried, discouraged, and dismissed outright as fantasy by those who had every reason to keep the struggling majority unaware that their own reality could be rewritten at all for a population convinced its story was finished, asks few questions of those who benefit from its continued silence. Not far from where Cassius worked, in a public library some miles distant, a librarian named Beatrix Underhill was quietly warned by a senior colleague against sharing certain old volumes with the public volumes describing, in language remarkably similar to what Cassius had found, the mind's power to revise the very reality it inhabits. She was told, vaguely and without any real or satisfying explanation, that such material was not appropriate for general circulation, though no one could ever explain to her satisfaction precisely why this should be so. She found herself wondering, in the quiet hours long after such conversations had ended, exactly whose interest that particular warning had truly been meant to protect, and whether it protected the public at all, or merely those who preferred the public remain unaware of what it might otherwise discover. Consider how readily you, too, may have dismissed the very idea of a rewritable reality as mere fantasy, before this evening nodding along, perhaps, with the common and comfortable wisdom that such ideas are fanciful nonsense, without ever once examining who first taught you to believe so, or why they might have benefited from your believing it so thoroughly. Practice. Tonight, set aside one inherited assumption you have long carried, that reality cannot truly be rewritten. You need not replace it with certainty just yet. Simply set it down, gently, and allow yourself the freedom to consider what follows with fresh and open attention. Chapter 2. Reality was never fixed. Everett Calloway spent his days as a surveyor, walking the same quiet fields season after season with his chain and his brass instruments, measuring land he believed, without ever once questioning it, to be entirely fixed and unchangeable. A boundary, to Everett, was simply a boundary, a line drawn once and drawn forever, a fact of the earth no more open to argument than the rising of the sun each morning. It never occurred to him, in all his careful years of measurement, that anything about his own circumstances, his modest income, his narrow prospects, the quiet disappointments that had gathered around him like fallen leaves, might be equally open to revision, equally available for editing by the very hand that had unknowingly written them into being. What appears solid and permanent in daily life is, in truth, far more editable than most are ever taught to believe possible. The fixed world, that governs so much of ordinary living, that shapes so many quiet resignations and so much patient suffering, is largely an inherited assumption, rather than any unshakable and final fact, passed down unquestioned from one generation to the next, simply because it was never once questioned by those who first taught it. Not far from Everett's measured fields, a woman named Millicent Rowe accepted her circumstances as a finished and unchangeable manuscript, the way one accepts a book already printed and bound, its pages sealed beyond any further alteration. Her modest means, her narrow opportunities, the quiet disappointments that had followed her through each passing year, all of it seemed to her simply the story already written, fixed long before she had any say in the matter. She never once considered that her own inner state might be quietly holding the very pen that continued, even now, to write it. Notice, gently and without judgment, where you too have accepted certain circumstances in your own life as a finished draft, without ever once considering they might still, even now, be revised. Practice. Tonight, identify one area of your life you have long assumed to be a finished draft, and gently question that assumption for the first time, considering whether it might, in truth, still be open to revision. Chapter 3. Why this law was called forbidden. Horace Delacroix owned a modest factory on the edge of a busy industrial town, and he took quiet and deliberate care to discourage any talk among his workers of changing their circumstances, of imagining a different and better story for their own lives. He was not a cruel man in any obvious sense, but he understood, in some unspoken way he rarely examined even to himself, that a mind convinced it could rewrite its own reality might no longer be willing to tolerate the circumstances he had so carefully arranged around it. Those who benefited from the limitation of others have always had every reason to make this law seem forbidden, dangerous, or simply beyond serious belief. Keeping the truth of the mind's editing power carefully out of common reach served, quite conveniently, the interests of those who profited from the unquestioning labor of people who never thought to reach for their own pen. Millicent Fairbanks, a young seamstress in a nearby town, was quietly mocked by her own family whenever she dared to speak of rewriting her circumstances, as though the very idea were somehow improper for someone of her modest station in life. Her aunts would exchange knowing glances. Her own mother would gently, but firmly remind her to accept the story she had been given and not to reach above it. And so, slowly and almost imperceptibly, Millicent learned to silence the very hope that might have carried her toward the revision she secretly, quietly, still longed to make. Consider who may have benefited, across your own life, from convincing you that your own reality could never truly be rewritten. A parent, perhaps, exhausted by their own unquestioned draft, a teacher, more comfortable with modest expectations than ambitious revision, or simply the general, unspoken atmosphere of a world that has long preferred its majority to remain unaware of what it might otherwise become. Practice. Tonight, identify one voice, past or present, that discouraged your belief in your own power to rewrite reality. Name that voice quietly to yourself and consciously set it aside, recognizing that its warning may have served its own comfort far more than it ever served your genuine potential. Chapter 4. The Editor Behind Every Circumstance. A young draftsman named Lucius Barnwell spent the greater part of his working hours bent low over long tables covered in careful drawings, marveling at how a great and towering building existed, first only as thin lines upon paper, nothing more than ink and careful measurement, long before a single stone of it ever rose from the earth to meet the sky. He took genuine pride in this quiet mystery of his craft, never once suspecting that his own life followed this very same quiet order of authorship, that it too was being drafted moment by moment, long before it ever took visible shape in the world around him. Every circumstance met in the outer world has first been quietly drafted, in thought and in feeling, by an unseen editor the reader has not yet learned to recognize as their own self. This inner editor does not announce its work with any fanfare. It labors silently and continually, in the background of every waking hour, whether its drafts are made with careful and deliberate intention or with careless, unattended neglect. A woman named Dorothea Pratt, an acquaintance of Lucius's who lived some streets away, blamed her circumstances entirely on chance, on ill fortune, and on the choices of others who she believed had wronged her at every turn. She never once suspected, in all her years of quiet blame, that an editor had been at work within her own mind all along drafting, in patient and persistent lines, the very circumstances she so often lamented as unfair and undeserved. Consider your own life, in this moment, as a manuscript already being edited, its scenes taking shape, its dialogue being written according to plans set down long before you thought to examine them. And ask yourself, honestly and without flinching, who has truly been holding the pen all this time? Practice. Tonight, identify one current circumstance in your life and trace it gently backward, step by patient step, to the inner belief or feeling that may have quietly drafted it into being. Chapter 5. The First Rule of Rewriting. Reginald Ashworth, a blacksmith of considerable skill, understood something from long years spent at his forge that no impatient apprentice could ever fully grasp, that no shape can be hammered into metal until the metal itself has first been softened by inner heat. Cold iron resists every blow, however forceful. Only heated iron yields to the shape the smith intends for it. Reality bends only to what is rewritten within before it is ever expected to change without. Attempting to force outer change while the inner draft remains entirely unchanged produces only frustration and resistance, the way striking cold iron produces only a jarring and fruitless clang rather than any true and lasting shape. Prudence Hallworth, a laundress in the same town as Reginald, attempted repeatedly to force her own outer circumstances to change, through sheer effort of will, taking on extra work, denying herself rest, straining against her situation with every resource available to her, while her inner beliefs about her own worth and her own possibilities remained entirely untouched beneath all that striving. She wondered, with growing frustration, why her considerable efforts met with such stubborn and repeated resistance, never once realizing that she was hammering at cold iron. Consider whether you, too, have been attempting to force outer change without first revising the inner draft that quietly determines what that change is even permitted to become. Practice. Tonight, identify one outer circumstance you wish to see changed and the inner belief that must first be revised before it can truly and lastingly change. Chapter 6. Why Most Never Learn to Rewrite. Young Herbert Kane was taught, from the very earliest years of his childhood, that life simply happens to people, that circumstance arrives as weather arrives, unbidden and ungovernable, and must be endured exactly as written, without complaint and without any thought of revision. No one in his household ever suggested that another way of living, one of active and deliberate revision, might exist beside this one. Generations have been conditioned, quietly and thoroughly, to accept their given draft of reality as final and unchangeable, and this long conditioning has kept the deeper editing power of the mind hidden from all but a rare few willing to look beyond what they were so carefully taught. A woman named Agnes Whitmore stumbled upon this power of revision almost entirely by accident, late in her own life, after decades of believing precisely what Herbert had been taught in his own childhood. She felt, upon discovering it, not only wonder but a quiet and unexpected sorrow for all the years that had passed before anyone had thought to show her sooner what she now understood so clearly. Consider what you, too, were taught to accept as a finished draft without question, and recognize this very moment, this quiet hour of listening, as your own exception to that long and ordinary pattern. Practice. Tonight, write down one belief about how life works that you were taught early in your own life, and gently consider whether it still deserves to remain in your draft going forward. Chapter 7. The Page You Didn't Know You Were Writing. Beatrice Hollingsworth noticed something curious over the course of many months about her daily encounters with the world, that wherever she went, whomever she met, people seemed to treat her almost exactly as she quietly expected to be treated, though she had never once spoken this expectation aloud or consciously chosen it as her own. Habitual thoughts and feelings have been quietly writing the reader's reality long before this book was ever opened, so that the page already being written, however unconsciously, deserves the same careful attention now given deliberately to its revision. Reginald Ashby tried, again and again across many frustrated years, to change his outer circumstances through sheer effort and strategy, while his habitual inner frustration remained entirely untouched and largely unnoticed beneath all his striving. He found, to his growing bewilderment, the very same frustrations mirrored back to him in ever new forms, unmistakably the same beneath their different disguises. Consider what page you have already been unconsciously writing, and whether it truly matches the story you now, in this moment, wish to tell. Practice. Tonight, identify one recurring pattern in your outer life, and consider gently what unconscious inner page it may have been faithfully reflecting all along. Chapter 8. Assumption. The pen that rewrites everything. Frederick Lowry, a modest clerk of unremarkable standing, began quietly assuming, without any outward evidence whatsoever to support the assumption, that he was a capable and deeply respected man. He did not announce this assumption to his colleagues. He simply carried it quietly within himself, day after day, until slowly, without any single dramatic turn of events, he found others beginning to treat him exactly so, as though his own quiet assumption had itself become the pen writing this new treatment into being. What a person assumes to be true about themselves and their life, held persistently enough, becomes the very ink with which their new reality is written, for assumption precedes and produces circumstance, rather than merely responding to it after the fact. Clarissa Dunmore assumed herself perpetually overlooked and unlucky in every venture she attempted, and found this assumption confirmed again and again, in ways that seemed to her, each time, like simple misfortune rather than her own continued and unexamined authorship. Examine your own quiet assumptions about yourself, and consider how faithfully those assumptions have already been written into the life you have built for yourself thus far. Practice. Tonight, identify one unhelpful self-assumption and consciously choose a new one to write in its place, repeating it softly as though it were already, quietly, true. Chapter 9. Undoing the Draft You Never Chose. Daniel Prescott was raised in a household where lack and limitation were spoken of daily as unchangeable fact, until he began to wonder, quite late in his own life, whether this inherited draft of reality was ever truly his own to keep, or whether he had simply been handed it unopened, the way one is handed an old and unread book. Before a new reality can be written, old inherited beliefs must be identified and deliberately struck from the page, making room for a new draft to take their place. This striking out is not violent or forceful. It is simply the deliberate recognition that what was inherited was never chosen. Clara Bishop unknowingly passed her own inherited draft of limitation onto her children, showing how such unchosen pages travel silently from one generation to the next, unless someone, at last, finally chooses to strike them out entirely. Trace your own beliefs about your life back to their true source, and consider whether these beliefs were ever truly chosen by you at all, or simply inherited without your consent. Practice. Tonight, name one inherited belief, and consciously strike it from your own draft, offering yourself, in its place, the freedom to write something new. Chapter 10. The first line you rewrite. Elias Thorne, a young blacksmith, had spent many years shaping only iron with careful and deliberate intention at his forge. One evening, for the first time, he turned that same careful attention inward and consciously rewrote a single belief about his own life with the very same intention and care he had always given to his craft. Rewriting reality begins the moment a single inner belief is deliberately changed, however small that first revision may seem in the moment of its making. This first rewritten line sets in motion a current that continues long afterward through the rest of the manuscript, quietly gathering force. Cyrus Bramwell, a neighbor who watched Elias's quiet revision unfold, remained skeptical throughout, unwilling to attempt the same small inner change himself, and continued living, entirely unaltered, by his own old and unquestioned draft. Recognize that you too now stand at this same threshold, ready to rewrite your own first line. Practice. To close this first part of your journey, consciously and deliberately rewrite one single belief about your life tonight, marking your own first line of revision. Act 2. The Sacred Practices of Rewriting Reality. Chapter 11. The Editing Hour. Homer Fairweather, a night watchman, discovered quite by accident that in the quiet hour before sleep, his mind grew unusually receptive to revision, accepting new impressions with far greater ease than during his busy and defended waking hours. There is a quiet hour each day best suited to revising the inner draft that becomes one's reality, a window in which the mind's usual resistance to editing grows unusually thin, allowing new lines to be written with far less struggle than at any other hour. Vera Applegate filled this same quiet hour each night with restless, unrevised worry, never once realizing the editing opportunity she wasted, night after night, by filling it with anxious repetition rather than deliberate revision. Notice your own quiet hour and what you have been allowing to occupy it until now. Practice. Tonight, identify your own editing hour and use it to revise one small inner belief. Chapter 12. Revising the Day Already Lived. Josephine Carter, a schoolteacher, began quietly revising each day's events before sleep, discovering that she could rewrite in her mind what had troubled her, and feel the day settle more peacefully as a result of this simple revision. Rewriting a disappointing moment in the mind, as it was wished to have gone, offers the subconscious a corrected instruction, gently undoing the day's discouragements before they can settle permanently into the larger draft of one's life. Elmer Griggs instead replayed his daily frustrations over and over without revision, unknowingly reinforcing the very draft he wished most fervently to escape. Consider how you typically end your day in thought, and whether it leaves an impression of an unrevised page or a corrected one. Practice. Tonight, gently rewrite one disappointing moment from your day as you wished it had gone. Chapter 13. Speaking the New Draft Aloud. Delphine Hargrove, a widow, took to softly speaking a single sentence of her rewritten reality to herself each night, and noticed, over many weeks, a quiet shift in the opportunities that began to find her. Words spoken about one's rewritten reality carry unusual power to seal it into place, for they are received by a mind already loosened from its daytime resistance to revision. Cornelius Beadle spoke only of his old, unrevised complaints each night, never once considering that his words might be reinforcing the very draft he wished to leave behind. Notice the words you habitually speak to yourself, and what draft those words may be quietly reinforcing. Practice. Tonight, compose one brief sentence of your rewritten reality to be spoken softly. Chapter 14. Feeling the Rewrite as Already True. Bartholomew Gray, a modest tailor, began carrying himself with the quiet ease of a man for whom his rewritten reality was already fact, long before any outward evidence supported it. A rewritten reality takes hold only once it is genuinely felt, not merely thought, for feeling carries a weight and permanence that thought alone cannot supply. Ophelia Rutherford thought constantly of her rewritten reality, yet felt only doubt beneath those thoughts, and wondered why her circumstances remained unmoved despite her constant mental focus. Examine whether your own rewritten belief has been accompanied by true feeling or only by hollow repetition. Practice. Tonight, generate a genuine feeling of your rewritten reality as already true. Chapter 15. Living from the Rewritten Scene. Marguerite Colt, a seamstress, began each day already feeling the quiet satisfaction of her rewritten scene, though her present circumstances did not yet fully reflect it. Approaching each day already living inside the rewritten scene, rather than the old unrevised one, accelerates the arrival of that scene into visible form. Oswald Pratt continued living each day from his old, unrevised scene despite having spoken new words the night before, and found his days faithfully confirming that same old draft again and again. Notice whether you typically begin your day living from the old scene or the newly rewritten one. Practice. Tomorrow morning, consciously step into your rewritten scene before beginning the day. Chapter 16. Clearing the Margins of Doubt. Nathaniel Cross, a radio operator, understood that even a strong signal cannot be received clearly through heavy static interference crowding its margins. Doubt, scribbled quietly in the margins of a rewritten reality, can undo even the most carefully revised draft, and so this doubt must be gently noticed and cleared, rather than allowed to accumulate unchecked. Beatrice Hollingsworth rewrote her reality faithfully each night, but allowed constant doubt to crowd its margins, and wondered why her results remained faint and inconsistent, despite her sincere revisions. Consider what doubts may currently be crowding the margins of your own rewritten draft. Practice. Notice a doubtful thought tonight and gently clear it from the margins before continuing your practice. Chapter 17. The Daily Ritual of Revision. Ezekiel Barlow assembled a brief, consistent daily ritual of revision from the practices he had learned, and found that the very consistency of the ritual became as powerful as any single revision within it. It is not any single dramatic rewrite, but the devoted repetition of a simple daily ritual that ultimately makes the rewritten reality permanent rather than temporary. Prudence Ainsley tried each revision only once or twice before abandoning it, never allowing any single rewrite the time it needed to take root. Consider your own consistency, and recognize that a single day's revision is only the beginning of a much longer editing process. Practice. Assemble your own brief daily ritual of revision tonight from the practices already learned. Chapter 18. Visualizing the finished draft. Clarence Whitlock each night pictured, in vivid and specific detail, his rewritten reality as a completed, finished scene rather than a work still in progress. Picturing the rewritten reality as already finished, rather than still being edited, strengthens its arrival into the visible world far more than imagining an unfinished or uncertain draft. Sylvia Duquette pictured her rewritten reality only as a vague possibility still under revision, and found her results just as uncertain and unfinished as her own imagining. Consider whether your own visualization pictures a finished scene or an unfinished one still in doubt. Practice. Tonight, visualize your rewritten reality as a complete, finished scene. Chapter 19. Gratitude as the Final Signature. Winifred Pemberton began closing each night's revision with a quiet word of thanks, as though signing her name to a finished and accepted draft. Gratitude offered in advance acts as the final signature that finalizes the rewritten reality, confirming to the subconscious that the new draft has already been accepted as complete. Leonard Fitch revised his reality each night, but withheld gratitude until proof appeared, unknowingly leaving his own draft unsigned and therefore unfinished. Consider whether you have been waiting for proof before allowing yourself this final signature of gratitude. Practice. Tonight, close your revision as though it were already finished and signed, offering brief gratitude. Chapter 20. Waking into the new draft. Beatrice Langford discovered that the manner in which she greeted each morning determined whether yesterday's revision held firm or quietly reverted to the old draft. How one meets each morning determines whether the previous night's rewrite holds firm throughout the day or is quietly undone by old habitual thought. Roscoe Bellamy woke each day already rehearsing his old, unrevised worries, undoing in moments the careful revision completed the night before. Consider how you typically greet your own waking moments, and whether this greeting reinforces or undoes your rewritten draft. Practice. To close this second part of your journey, greet tomorrow's waking moment from within your newly rewritten draft. Act 3. Living the Rewritten Reality. Chapter 21. The First Proof. The Rewrite is Holding. Silas Merriweather began noticing small, unexpected signs of his rewritten reality appearing in his days shortly after beginning his practice, though he nearly dismissed them as mere coincidence at first. Small, easily overlooked occurrences are often the first proof that a rewritten reality has begun to hold, and learning to recognize these quiet signs strengthens the very faith that allows the revision to continue taking root. Ophelia Rundgren noticed similar small signs but waved them away as unimportant, and so failed to nourish the confidence that would carry her rewrite further. Consider the small, easily dismissed signs that may already be appearing in your own life since beginning this practice. Practice. Keep a brief, nightly note of one small sign that your rewritten reality is beginning to hold. Chapter 22. Becoming the author, not the character. Horace Pemberley, a struggling grocer, stopped reacting to his circumstances as a mere character within them, and instead began consciously thinking and acting as the author still holding the pen over his own unfolding story. Lasting change comes from living as the author of one's reality, rather than merely a character reacting within it, for the author retains the power to revise at any point, while the character can only respond to what has already been written. Prudence Alderman continued reacting helplessly to her circumstances as though she were only a character within someone else's story, never once remembering her own authorship. Consider whether you have been living as author or merely as character in your own unfolding story. Practice. Identify one recent moment you reacted as a character and reconsider it now as its author. Chapter 23. When the old draft tries to resurface. Eugene Halloway, well along in his practice, was startled one difficult week to find his old, unrevised beliefs rising up again as strongly as ever, threatening to overwrite the careful revisions he had made. The old, familiar draft may briefly resurface even after real revision has begun, and this resurfacing is not failure but a natural, passing stage in which the old and new drafts briefly compete before the new one settles fully into place. Henrietta Coswell mistook this same resurfacing as proof that her revisions had failed entirely and abandoned her practice in discouragement. Recognize the brief resurfacing of the old draft as ordinary, not as defeat. Practice. When the old, unrevised draft briefly resurfaces, meet it with a brief, calming exercise, returning gently to your new draft. Chapter 24. The Patience of a Careful Editor. An old vintner, Solomon Whitlock, understood that fine wine cannot be hurried toward maturity, however eager the drinker waiting to taste it may be. A skilled editor does not rush revision, and the rewritten reality, like fine wine, unfolds fully only in its own proper and unhurried time. Young Marigold Ash abandoned her own revision after only a few days, expecting immediate transformation, and so interrupted an editing process only just beginning its work. Consider your own patience and whether you have expected the finished draft before its proper season. Practice. Tonight, offer yourself a brief reminder, affirming quiet patience with the unseen timing of your own rewritten reality. Chapter 25. Guarding Your Draft. From outside editors, Josephine Kavanagh noticed that after sharing her rewritten intention with a skeptical relative, her own confidence in that revision felt strangely diminished for days afterward, as though an outside hand had crept in to alter her draft. The opinions and doubts of others can quietly alter one's own draft if allowed too close, and this draft must be guarded with the same care given to any other stage of the revision process. Bartholomew Rees shared his rewritten intentions freely with anyone who would listen, absorbing their doubts each time, and found his own draft growing less certain the more widely he shared it. Consider whose doubts may currently have too much editorial access to your own rewritten draft. Practice. Identify one outside voice you will consciously keep from editing your draft. Chapter 26. Rewriting Relationships and Circumstance. Frederick Lansing noticed that as his own rewritten reality grew steadily stronger, favorable people and unexpected opportunities began approaching him with an ease he had never previously experienced. The same law rewriting one's personal circumstances also rewrites how others and opportunity respond outwardly, for the underlying draft held within a person shapes far more than they initially realize. Agatha Winslow focused her revision narrowly on a single circumstance while leaving her relationships entirely unrevised, and found those relationships remaining curiously unchanged despite her other progress. Consider how your own rewritten reality might already be extending beyond the single area you have focused upon. Practice. Extend today's revision to include one relationship or circumstance beyond your primary focus. Chapter 27. Setbacks as Necessary Revisions. Aloysius Grant was deeply discouraged when a long-awaited venture collapsed, only to discover, months later, that its collapse was itself a necessary revision, quietly redirecting him toward a far stronger final draft. An apparent setback is often the story correcting itself toward a stronger and truer final draft, rather than a sign that the reader's revisions have failed. Beatrice Noloth resisted and resented an early setback so completely that she failed to notice the necessary revision it was quietly offering her. Consider a past setback of your own, and what necessary revision it may have quietly represented. Practice. Reflect gently on one past setback, and search for the necessary revision within it. Chapter 28. Those who rewrote reality before you. An old harbor pilot, Ezra Thornbury, whose calm and unshakable circumstances were quietly attributed by others to simple good fortune, privately practiced a lifelong habit of rewriting his own beliefs he rarely spoke of to anyone. Quiet figures throughout history have secretly used this same forbidden law to shape their own lives, leaving faint traces in old letters and family memory for those who look closely. A young descendant, Charlotte Thornbury, discovered her ancestors' private journal and recognized, with quiet astonishment, the very practices she had just learned in this book. Consider what quiet revisions may exist, unrecognized, in your own family history. Practice. Reflect briefly on one such quiet revision from your own life or lineage. Chapter 29. Teaching others to rewrite their own story. Clementine Marsh gently shared this forbidden law with a struggling friend, and found her own conviction and results deepening as she guided her friend toward the same discovery. Sharing this law with others, freely and without insistence, deepens the teacher's own mastery of it, for what is taught with sincerity becomes more firmly rooted within the one who shares it. Ambrose Fenwick hoarded his newfound knowledge jealously, refusing to share it even with those he loved, and found his own progress growing strangely stagnant. Consider whether there is someone in your life you might gently teach to rewrite their own story. Practice. Identify one person with whom you might gently share a single teaching from this book. Chapter 30. The Story That No Longer Needs. Revising. An aged Rutherford Blake found that this practice of revision had become so natural that his mind now edited itself effortlessly, requiring no conscious rewriting to continue shaping his life in his favor. Once this forbidden law is truly learned and lived, the rewritten reality becomes so natural that it requires no further conscious editing, continuing of its own accord to reflect the settled and aligned mind that shaped it. A young seeker, Wilhelmina Foss, visited old Rutherford and asked him the secret of his quiet fortune, only to be told simply that he no longer rewrites his story, for he and the story have long since become one and the same. Imagine your own future self, for whom this revision requires no more effort than simply living. Practice. To close this third and final part of your journey, envision your own life, years from now, having lived this rewritten reality so long that it requires no further conscious editing at all. Epilogue. You now carry a forbidden law once kept from those who most needed it, the quiet, lasting power to rewrite your own reality for as long as you choose to live it. What was once guarded so carefully, buried in misfiled manuscripts and unspoken family habits, now belongs openly to you. Consider the distance already traveled, from the first discovery of this hidden law to this final understanding of authorship and revision. Your own rewritten draft has already begun its quiet work, whether or not outward proof has yet fully appeared. Reality was never truly fixed, only waiting for you to remember you were always the one holding the pen ready from this moment forward to write whatever you now choose.